My name is Helen, and I made my fortune by never letting anyone underestimate me. A lesson my own son tragically forgot. After I paid cash for his $2 million dream house, he sent me a text message kicking me off our family cruise. His wife, he said, preferred it to be just family. So, while they were off enjoying the Alaskan glaciers, I made one phone call. I sold their new house right out from under them. You won't want to miss what happens when they get home. Follow my story, give it a like, and let me know in the comments what you think their faces will look like when they pull into the driveway. Follow along to see the fallout. Hit that subscribe button, give this a like, and drop a comment if you're ready for some payback. The scent of fresh paint and new beginnings hung in the air, a perfume more expensive than any bottle I owned. I stood back, my arms crossed, and watched as the realtor placed a small, velvet-lined box into my daughter-in-law Ashley's hands. Inside, nestled like jewels, were the keys to this house. Not just a house, a $2 million statement of my love, set on a manicured half-acre in the city's most coveted suburb. I can't believe it's ours, Ashley breathed, her eyes wide. She looked at my son, David, and a brilliant proprietary smile lit up her face. My son, my only child, wrapped an arm around her. It's amazing, Mom. Thank you. He looked at me then, and in his eyes, I saw the reflection of the boy I'd raised, the one I'd promised my late husband, Richard, I would always protect. See that he's secure, Helen, Richard had whispered to me in his final days. That's all that matters. I'd done more than make him secure. I'd made him wealthy. After Richard passed, I'd taken our modest construction business and, through 2 decades of grit and shrewd decisions, built it into an empire. I didn't need this kind of money for myself. My joy came from giving, from providing. It's your home, I said, my voice thick with emotion. A place to raise Lily and Noah. A place for memories. Speaking of memories, I continued, pulling 3 thick envelopes from my purse. I have one more surprise. I handed one to David. He opened it, his jaw dropping as he pulled out the cruise tickets. No way. Alaska. The Glacier Bay itinerary. The very best one, I confirmed, beaming. For all of us. To celebrate this new chapter. We leave in 2 weeks. Ashley's smile seemed to tighten for just a fraction of a second before it returned, brighter than ever. Helen, you shouldn't have. But I saw the way her eyes scanned the tickets, the way her hand clutched the keys to her new mansion. I knew she felt I should have. She believed this was her due. And in my foolish, generous heart, I was simply happy to give it to her. In the 2 weeks that followed, a subtle chill began to creep into the edges of our interactions. It was nothing I could put my finger on, just a series of small, almost imperceptible slights. One afternoon, I stopped by the new house with fabric swatches for the living room curtains. I found Ashley there with an interior designer, a sleek woman in her 30s who looked me up and down as if I were a piece of dated furniture. Oh, Helen, Ashley said, her voice a little too bright. We're just finalizing the color palette. It's a very specific vision. She took the swatches from my hand and placed them on a dusty counter without a glance. Thank you, though. The message was clear. My taste was not required. Few days later I called David. I have that old mahogany desk from your father's study in storage. It would be perfect for your new home office. There was a pause. I could hear Ashley's voice, a faint murmur in the background. Ah, thanks, Mom, but Ash has already ordered a whole set of custom furniture from somewhere in Scandinavia, he said, his voice strained. You know, to match the aesthetic. Even my offer to help them pack was rebuffed. We've got movers for the heavy lifting, and Ashley has a system for everything else, David explained. It's easier this way. Each excuse was a tiny paper cut. I told myself I was being overly sensitive, a meddling mother-in-law who needed to let go. They were building their own life, their own home. I was the one funding it, but they were the ones who had to live in it. So I swallowed my hurt, focused on the cruise, and told myself that everything would feel right again once we were all together on that ship, sailing toward the majestic icebergs of Alaska. I was in my bedroom, laying a cashmere sweater next to a pair of waterproof pants, a smile on my face. The logistics of packing for Alaska were a welcome distraction. I imagined my grandson Noah's face when he saw a bald eagle, or Lily's awe at a breaching whale. These were the memories my money was for. My phone chimed on the bed. A notification from WhatsApp. I picked it up, expecting a picture of the kids or a last-minute question from David. Opened the app. His name was at the top. The message was short. My heart didn't just sink. Stop. Hi, Mom. Slight change of plans for the cruise. You won't be joining us. Ashley prefers to keep it just family. We'll bring you back a souvenir. I read it once, then a second time. My brain refused to process the words. They were cold, clinical, utterly devoid of emotion. It was the kind of message you send to cancel a dental appointment, not to detonate your mother's world. Ashley prefers to keep it just family. Just family. I, Helen Sterling, the woman who gave him life, who signed the check that bought his $2 million house, who paid for the very cruise tickets he was now using to discard me. I was not just family. The room began to spin. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the cashmere sweater forgotten in my lap. The silence of my large, empty house pressed in on me. Souvenir. They would bring me back a souvenir. The insult was so profound, so dismissive, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. A keychain or a snow globe in exchange for my heart. My hands trembled so violently I could barely unlock my phone again. I hit David's number on speed dial. It rang 4 times, each tone an eternity, before he finally answered. Mom, he said, his voice low and tight. He was expecting my call. David, I said, my own voice dangerously calm. I need you to explain that text message. Look, it's not a big deal, he started, but I cut him off. Not a big deal. The calm snapped. You uninvite your mother from a family vacation via text message and it's not a big deal? There was a muffled sound, and I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that he was covering the phone's microphone to speak to Ashley. His next words confirmed it. Ash just feels. We need a trip with just us and the kids. To bond as our own little family unit. In the new house, and now this. It's a lot of pressure. Pressure? I asked, my voice rising with disbelief. The pressure of accepting multi-million-dollar gifts. Is that what you mean? Mom, please don't be like this, he pleaded, his voice whining and weak. He was a 40-year-old man who sounded like a teenager caught sneaking out. It's just this one time. We'll do something else, just you and me later. He was a puppet. A spineless puppet. And I could hear the puppeteer whispering his lines just out of frame. He wouldn't stand up for me. He wouldn't even grant me the dignity of a real conversation. He let his wife erase me from the family I had built, and his only defense was a pathetic, whimpered plea for me to understand. The immense, crushing hurt inside me began a miraculous transformation. It wasn't healing, it was petrifying. The soft, bleeding wound was hardening, crystallizing into something cold, sharp, and unbreakable. I see, I said, the 2 words falling like chips of ice into the phone. I see everything perfectly now. You have a wonderful trip, David. I ended the call before he could reply. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark of my living room, the room where I had hosted David's high school graduation party, the room where he'd introduced me to Ashley a decade ago. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. Dawn broke, painting the sky in soft shades of rose and gray, and with the first light of the new day, I was filled with a chilling, absolute clarity. I didn't call a friend. I didn't call my sister. I picked up the phone and dialed the private line of Robert Stowe, my financial advisor and lawyer for the past 30 years. Robert, I said when he answered, my voice as crisp as a freshly printed stock certificate. I have an urgent matter. Helen. It's 6 a.m. Is everything all right? Everything is about to be, I replied. A quick question for you. The house I just purchased on Edgewood Lane. It's held in the H. Sterling Revocable Trust, correct? Of course, he said. David and Ashley are listed as the residential beneficiaries, but you remain the sole trustee with full authority over all assets within the trust. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Full authority. That means I have the right to sell any asset, at any time, for any reason. Well, yes, Robert said, a note of confusion in his voice. Legally, you have absolute control. Excellent, I said. I need you to find a realtor. The best and the fastest one, you know. My son and his family leave for a 10-day Alaskan cruise tomorrow. I want that house on the market by the time their plane takes off. And Robert, I want it sold by the time they get back. The key slid into the lock of the front door with a smooth, silent click. The air inside was still and cool, thick with the chemical odor of fresh paint and new carpet. I walked through the cavernous foyer, my sensible heels echoing on the polished oak floors. 2-story ceilings, a sweeping staircase, a Palladian window that flooded the empty space with morning light. It was a palace for a prince I had mistakenly raised. This was supposed to be a place of joy. I had pictured my grandchildren, Lily and Noah, sliding down that banister, their laughter bouncing off the walls. I had imagined Thanksgiving dinners in the formal dining room, Christmas mornings in the great room by the massive stone fireplace. Now I felt nothing. The house was no longer a home. It was a ghost, an asset that had failed to perform. A woman with a severe haircut and an impeccably tailored suit met me in the kitchen. This was Melinda, the realtor Robert had recommended, known for her speed and discretion. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the cavernous space. "It's magnificent, Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice all business. "Pristine. It will move fast." She didn't ask why I was selling a house my family hadn't even moved into yet. Robert had clearly briefed her that the reasons were not her concern. She spread the listing agreement across the vast marble island, the one Ashley had gushed about for weeks. I uncapped my pen. The signature was firm, a black slash of ink that felt like a final severing. I was no longer building a legacy. I was liquidating it. Back in my own home office, surrounded by photos of David's childhood, I began the real work. The house was the centerpiece of my revenge, but it was not the entirety of it. I was not just taking back a gift. I was dismantling a system of dependence I had foolishly created. My first call was to the leasing agent for the brand new luxury SUV Ashley drove. "Hello, this is Helen Sterling," I said calmly. "I am the primary lessee on the account for an Audi Q7. I am terminating the lease agreement, effective immediately. Please arrange to have the vehicle repossessed." The agent stammered, confused, but the contract was clear. I was within my rights. Next, I called the administrative office of the Oak Ridge Country Club. For 10 years, I had paid the exorbitant annual dues for David and his family. "I will not be renewing my family membership," I stated, cutting off the secretary's cheerful greeting. "Please deactivate all key cards associated with my account by the end of the business day." The final and perhaps most satisfying call was to the credit card company. I had given David a platinum card with a ridiculously high limit for emergencies. In his world, a new set of golf clubs was an emergency. "I am closing my account," I told the representative. "And I want to report the supplementary card in the name of David Sterling as lost. Please cancel it immediately." One by one, I snipped the golden threads of the safety net I had woven around my son. He was about to learn the true cost of the life he so carelessly enjoyed. He was about to experience the vertigo of a free fall. A week passed in a blur of paperwork and quiet resolve. Their cruise ship was somewhere in Tracy Arm Fjord, according to the itinerary I had memorized. They were surrounded by breathtaking beauty, oblivious. That evening my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Lily, sent from her iPad using the ship's spotty Wi-Fi. A photo appeared on my screen, showing her and Noah, bundled in parkas, their cheeks pink from the cold, a magnificent turquoise-blue glacier calving into the sea behind them. The text below the image was a dagger to my heart. "Hi, Grandma. We saw a glacier today. It made a big boom when the ice fell. Wish you were here. We miss you. Red heart. My composure, so carefully constructed, shattered. A sob caught in my throat. These children, my precious grandchildren, were innocent. My war was with their parents, but they would be the collateral damage. For a dizzying moment, I almost reached for the phone to call Robert, to call the whole thing off. The pain of Lily's sweet, simple message was immense. Then, with a trembling finger, I scrolled up in my message history. I found the text from David. I read it again. Ashley prefers to keep it just family. The ice reformed around my heart. This wasn't just about my hurt feelings. This was a lesson. A brutal, necessary lesson for a son who needed to learn the meaning of loyalty, respect, and family. I was doing this for Lily and Noah, to protect them from a father with no spine and a mother with no soul. I would not let them be raised to believe that love was transactional, and that family could be discarded for convenience. The call came 2 days later. It was Melinda, the realtor. Her voice was electric with excitement. "Helen, you are not going to believe this," she said. "I have an offer. A dream offer." She laid it out. The buyer was a neurosurgeon, being headhunted by the university hospital. He was relocating with his family and needed to move immediately. They had seen the house online, flown in for a private tour that morning, and fallen in love. "They're offering all cash, Helen," Melinda said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "No mortgage contingency. They'll waive the inspection. And they are willing to close in 3 days." The timing was so perfect it felt like an act of God. It was a sign. The universe itself seemed to be aligned with my quest for justice. "What's the price?" I asked, my voice betraying no emotion. "It's 5% below your purchase price. For an all-cash offer with a 3-day close. It's a phenomenal deal." I didn't hesitate. There was no need to negotiate. The speed and certainty were worth more than any dollar amount. "Sell it," I said. The closing was an electronic whirlwind. Funds were wired, deeds were transferred, and digital signatures were affixed to dozens of documents. 3 days after the surgeon's offer, the $2 million, minus commission and closing costs, was back in my trust account. The house on Edgewood Lane was no longer mine. That night, I sat in the familiar comfort of my own living room, a glass of Pinot Noir in my hand. Outside, a summer storm was rolling in, the sky rumbling in the distance. I felt a profound, almost unnerving sense of calm. The queen had been taken off the board, so she had flipped the whole damn table. I checked the cruise lines app on my phone. Their ship had docked in Seattle that afternoon. They would be flying home tomorrow, filled with stories of their grand adventure, expecting to return to a life of effortless luxury. They had no idea they were flying straight into the eye of a storm I had created just for them. The trap was set. The house was sold. The accounts were closed. And I, the discarded matriarch, was simply waiting. I imagined the scene with cinematic clarity. The airport taxi pulling up to the curb on Edgewood Lane. My son, David, emerging first, tanned and relaxed, followed by Ashley, directing the driver with the casual authority of a woman who had never carried her own luggage. Then my grandchildren, Lily and Noah, spilling out, tired from the flight but excited to finally be home. I pictured David walking up the bluestone path, fumbling in his pocket for the key to the life he thought he owned. The key slides into the brand new lock. It doesn't turn. He jiggles it, his brow furrowing in annoyance. He tries again. Nothing. Ashley would be tapping her foot impatiently. "David, honestly, what's wrong?" And then, just as his frustration peaks, his eyes would drift from the door to the lawn. He'd see it. A simple sign staked deep into the pristine grass. 4 stark red letters against a white background. Sold. I could almost feel the jolt of adrenaline and confusion that would shoot through him. I pictured him backing away from the door, his gaze sweeping across the front of the house as if seeing it for the first time, trying to make sense of an impossible reality. The taxi driver would be waiting, the meter running, as my son's perfect world began to dissolve around him. My phone shrieked, tearing through the quiet of my study. I looked at the caller ID. David. I took a slow, steadying breath and answered, putting the call on speaker. A raw, ragged sound, halfway between a scream and a sob, filled the room. Mom, what did you do? David, you'll have to be more specific, I said, my voice as placid as a frozen lake. The house. There's a sold sign on the lawn. The locks are changed. What the hell did you do to our house? I let his frantic, panicked words hang in the air for a moment. I let him feel the full weight of his powerlessness. It was never your house, David, I replied, my tone clinical, detached. It was an asset in a trust that I control. It was my property. But it was for us. It was our home. No, I corrected him gently. It was a gift. And gifts are predicated on love and respect. When you sent me that text message, you made it very clear that I was not considered family. So I dealt with my property as I saw fit. It's as simple as that. A choked, strangled noise came from his end of the line. Then I heard it, a piercing shriek in the background, a sound of pure, undiluted fury. It was Ashley. She had understood. I have to go, David stammered, and the line went dead. I stared at the silent phone. It was done. The first shell had landed, and I had heard the satisfying explosion of impact. He showed up at my door 3 hours later. It was nearly 11 o'clock at night. He looked like a man who had been in a car wreck. His face was pale. His eyes were bloodshot, and his clothes, which had looked stylish and relaxed at the airport, now seemed rumpled and pathetic. I let him in but didn't offer him a seat. We stood in my foyer, the same place where he'd stood as a teenager, asking for the car keys. We're at a Holiday Inn by the airport, he said, his voice hollow. Ashley is losing her mind. He ran a hand through his hair, his whole body trembling. She blames me. She said I was a spineless coward, that I should have managed you, that I let you win. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Then I told her it was her idea to send the text, that her greed and her ambition cost us everything. He recounted the fight in searing detail. A brutal, vicious war of words waged in the sterile anonymity of a hotel room, with their terrified children listening through the thin connecting door. He told me she had thrown her phone against the wall, shattering it, after discovering her SUV's lease had been terminated and the country club membership was void. Their gilded life wasn't just cracking, it had been pulverized. The foundation of their marriage, I now saw with perfect clarity, wasn't love or partnership. It was my money. And now that it was gone, they were turning on each other like starving wolves. What do you want me to do, David? I asked quietly. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He wanted me to fix it. He wanted me to undo it all and make the nightmare go away. Gave him nothing. I just stood there in silence until he turned and walked out my door, a 40-year-old man who had just realized he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The days that followed brought a cascade of humiliations for the would-be lord and lady of Edgewood Lane. David called to tell me they had moved in with Ashley's parents. I could only imagine the suffocating atmosphere of that house. Ashley's mother judging his every move, her father silently radiating disappointment. The most public spectacle came a week later. I learned from my sister, who had heard it from a friend in Ashley's gossip circle, that the Audi had been unceremoniously towed from her parents' pristine driveway in the middle of the afternoon, right in front of their horrified neighbors. Their social status evaporated overnight. Friends stopped returning their calls. Dinner invitations dried up. They were no longer the aspirational new power couple. They were a cautionary tale. The calls and texts I received became a pathetic cycle of desperation. First came the apologies, syrupy and transparently false. Then came the thinly veiled threats of legal action, which I knew were empty. Then finally came the raw, desperate begging. One night, a text from David simply read, "Mom, please. We have nothing." I read it, and then I deleted it without a reply. 2 weeks after their return, my phone rang late one night from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello. A tiny, hushed voice whispered on the other end. Grandma. My heart seized. Lily. Honey, is that you? Where are you? I'm in the linen closet, she whispered, her voice trembling. I borrowed Daddy's phone when he was in the shower. I have to be quiet. I could hear the fear in her voice, and it was a physical blow. What's wrong, sweetheart? Mommy and Daddy, she said, her voice cracking as she started to cry. They're always yelling. Always. About you and the house and money. Daddy says we're ruined, and Mommy cries all the time. I don't like it here, Grandma. I'm scared. Her small, terrified sobs echoed down the line, dismantling my fortress of righteous anger brick by brick. My perfect, clean revenge was a myth. I had envisioned a surgical strike against two deserving targets. I had never intended to terrorize my grandchildren, to make them hide in closets and listen to their parents tear each other apart. My victory suddenly felt hollow, tainted by the tears of the one person I would do anything to protect. I had won the war, but the realization was dawning that the fallout zone was far bigger and messier than I had ever imagined. Lily's terrified sobs echoed in my mind for days. They were a constant, painful reminder that my actions had consequences beyond my own satisfaction. My righteous anger had to make room for my duty as a grandmother. I called David and told him to meet me at a small, neutral coffee shop halfway between our homes. He looked haggard, older than his years. He started to launch into another rambling apology, but I held up a hand to stop him. I didn't ask you here to rehash our argument, David, I said, my voice low and firm. I'm here to talk about my grandchildren. Their well-being is now my primary concern. I slid a folder across the table. I am establishing irrevocable educational trusts for both Lily and Noah. They will be fully funded through their university years. I am the sole trustee. You and Ashley will have no access and no control over these funds. Is that clear? He nodded, looking stunned. Yes, Mom. Good, I continued, leaning forward. Now for us. The Bank of Mom is permanently closed. There will be no more houses, no more cars, no more bailouts. You are a 40-year-old man, and it is time you stood on your own 2 feet. If you want me in your life, if you want me in your children's lives, it will be on these terms. I will be their grandmother, not their benefactor. It is up to you to be their father. He stared into his coffee cup, his shoulders slumped. For the first time, I saw not a spoiled child, but a man truly comprehending the scale of his failure. Okay, Mom, he whispered. I understand. The new reality was a weight Ashley could not bear. Without the shield of wealth and status, her marriage to my son began to publicly disintegrate. I heard the stories through the grapevine. Fights in the grocery store, Ashley's tearful, wine-fueled complaints at neighborhood gatherings about how David had failed her, how he had let his mother ruin their lives. She saw no fault in her own actions, only in the outcome. The life she had signed up for was one of luxury and ease. A 2-bedroom apartment, a used sedan, and a husband working a mid-level logistics job were not part of the bargain. The constant pressure and her bitter resentment wore David down. Their shared life, exposed to the elements, was revealed to be nothing but a shallowly rooted sapling, and it quickly withered. 6 months after their disastrous homecoming, David called me. His voice was flat, exhausted. We've separated, he said. She's keeping her parents' house. I found a small apartment near the kids' school. It's better this way, Mom. For everyone. Especially the kids. I felt no triumph, only a quiet, somber sense of inevitability. The fire I had started had finally burned itself out, leaving nothing but ashes behind. The months that followed were a crucible for my son. For the first time in his adult life, he was truly on his own. He had to budget, to cook, to manage his time between his job and his children. He was forced to become the father he should have been all along, not because he wanted to, but because there was no one else to do it for him. Slowly I saw changes. He stopped calling me with problems and started calling just to tell me a funny story about Noah or a success Lily had at school. He seemed less burdened, even though his life was objectively harder. He was building something of his own, however modest, and it was giving him a sense of self-worth that my money had never been able to buy. He chose to be a father, not a prince in waiting. He chose responsibility over resentment. He was, at long last, making a choice to grow up. Nearly a year to the day after the fateful text message, David asked me to lunch. Not a fancy restaurant, but a small diner he liked near his apartment. We sat in a worn vinyl booth, the air smelling of coffee and fried bacon. After we ordered, he put his hands flat on the table and looked me directly in the eye. "Mom," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I've wanted to say this for a long time, but I don't think I had the right to before now. I am sorry." He didn't stop there. It wasn't a blanket apology. It was specific. "I'm sorry for being weak. I'm sorry for disrespecting you, for letting you believe for even a second that you weren't the center of our family. I'm sorry for the hurt I caused, for being a coward, and for taking everything you gave me for granted. It wasn't about the house or the money. It was about me failing as a son. And for that, I am truly deeply sorry." Tears welled in my eyes. This was it. This was the apology that mattered. It was an acknowledgement of the real betrayal. "Thank you, David," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Thank you for that. Today my life is different. It's smaller, but it's infinitely richer. 3 days a week, I pick up Lily and Noah from school. We do homework at my kitchen table, the same one David used as a boy. I go to their soccer games and piano recitals. I am not a distant, revered benefactor who swoops in with grand gestures. I am simply grandma. David and I are rebuilding. Our relationship is not what it was. It's better. It's honest. It's built on conversation and shared time, not financial transactions. He is a good father, tired and stressed sometimes, but present and accounted for. I look back at the woman who sold a $2 million house out from under her son. I don't see a monster. I see a mother who was pushed too far, who wielded her power like a weapon because it was the only way to be heard. My revenge was a destructive act, yes, but it was also an act of creation. It burned a shallow, rotten forest to the ground so that something new and healthy could grow in its place. My legacy will not be the buildings I built or the fortune I amassed. It will be in the resilience of my grandchildren, and in the quiet strength of a son who finally learned how to stand on his own. I lost a dependent, but in the wreckage, I found my son again. And that is a bargain I would make every time. And so, we found our new beginning. Not in a mansion, but in the quiet moments. Homework at my kitchen table, weekend games at the park. It's a fragile piece, built on respect, not riches. But it leaves me with one lingering question. If my son faced a true crisis tomorrow, a medical emergency or a job loss, should I break my own rule and rescue him financially? Comment, save him, if a mother's love has no rules, or let him stand, if the lesson must endure. Tell me what you would do.